Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining, especially in the heat. Appreciate you turning up. I'm Steff Preyer. I'm the head of growth marketing here at Everybody Agency. And as the title probably suggests, my role focuses on driving measurable growth for our healthcare clients. A lot of that growth at the moment is coming from this rise in LLM, large language model, and AI search and the changing search landscape. So what we're going to be focusing on today is how the search landscape is changing and how your offsite strategy can influence your brand's presence in these AI results. It'll be about half an hour. We'll have 15 minutes for questions at the end. So if you've got any questions, you can drop them into the Q&A function in Zoom as we go along, and I'll go through as many as I can at the end. And also just to note, it is healthcare focused, but if you are not here representing a healthcare brand, there's a lot of industry agnostic nuggets that you'll be able to take away with you. So why are we here in the first place? Mainly it's because the search and visibility landscape is changing rapidly, as we are all aware. And a question that a lot of brands are asking themselves is, if AI was asked about your products or your therapy area tomorrow, would your brand be cited? Would it be part of the answer? There's been a huge shift in search behavior over the last few years, and we're moving away from searching towards asking. So as many of you will be aware, people are searching on Google, obviously, but then alongside that on these large language models, LLMs, platforms like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude. The way in which people are searching is also becoming much more conversational. People are using voice inputs, asking much longer questions than historically when you were just searching on Google with a few keywords. So it's no longer a case of competing to deliver the listing. On traditional search, we've always tried to be that number one ranking position on Google, but we're now competing to deliver part of the answer. A nice analogy that I like that compares the two is Google search offers you a selection of doors, but AI opens one and walks you through it. So the intent is the same, but the way in which we approach them is slightly different. And the visibility model is expanding. We now have two engines. So we still have our traditional search engine, and that is not going anywhere at the moment. So the things that count there still continue to count. Things like your keyword and your topic targeting, your content relevance, the technical performance of your website. Does it load fast? Can search engines crawl and index all your pages? And authoritative backlinks. So are you getting links from high quality, relevant, referring domains into your own website? And all of this on this search engine side of things aids discoverability. So are users able to find your website when they're searching on Google or Bing or another search engine? The second engine is AI systems, and the things that matter here are slightly different. So you've got things like entity recognition, which we'll be going into a bit, but at a very top level, an entity is any individual unique thing connected with your brand or your company or your organization. So it could be a product that you produce, a therapy area that it addresses, a disease state, and how these interlink together. AI systems also care about citation frequency, so how often your brand is mentioned across various different platforms and websites, not just what you do on your own website. Cross-platform consistency, so how your brands or products are referred to both in your owned media as well as earned media. And trusted source reinforcement, so less about links for AI platforms and more about who is talking about you. Are they key opinion leaders in the area? Are they relevant websites? And certain platforms count for more than others. And with the AI system, what you're aiming for here is inclusion. So being part of the answer. So it's two different approaches, but to win in both, we really need both. This is where GEO or Generative Engine Optimization comes in, which is essentially the practice of building authority that AI systems are confident enough to cite. So SEO was all about search engine optimization. GEO is generative engine optimization. So how do we become part of the answer that LLMs produce when someone is asking them a question? And why does it matter in healthcare? AI systems are now answering health queries directly, and they cite a narrow set of trusted sources. So they're not looking at every website out there, but they rely quite heavily on certain websites and certain platforms, which we'll be going into the data a little bit later. And the opportunity or the threat really here is that every answer that names your competitor and not you is a missed interaction with a patient or a clinician. So how do we become part of the answer? Well, the things that we were doing before for SEO, still count. So if you think historically what you would do to get your website to rank well on Google is you would build a really strong technical foundation. You'd make sure it loads really fast, that it's crawled and indexed properly, strong internal linking. Then you would build really good in-depth authoritative content. You would answer all the questions that your audience was talking about, link together related pages, and create a great user experience. And all of that would hopefully get you somewhere on page 1, maybe the second half. But what would get you into positions 1, 2, 3 is your offsite signals. So mainly links from authoritative, relevant websites coming in. And that would be the thing that would boost you into the top few positions. And as anyone who's worked in SEO knows, this works. It still works, but it takes time. It can take months or even years. The thing that's different for LLMs is the on-site, the content and the technical things that optimize your site for SEO also very much help for GEO. But there's another factor here, which is your offsite authority. And the thing with LLMs is that if you get talked about enough in certain spaces online, your brand could be recommended virtually overnight, or at least within a week. Whereas it takes much longer to build up that branded presence on your website. So you might launch a new product and you have very thin content on your website at the moment. It's just a small 3-page website. On SEO, that's not going to get you ranking for a while. But if enough people are talking about you in certain places online, LinkedIn, YouTube videos, reviewing your product, Reddit threads, things like that, LLMs go, look at all this information about your brand, and they might then end up recommending you tomorrow. This obviously poses a great opportunity, but also a threat, because the opportunity is obviously you can build your visibility in LLMs much quicker than on Google traditional search. But the threat is if you've got faster moving competitors, new competitors who enter the market and they have a really solid offsite strategy, they might leapfrog you even though you've put in years of work into your website. So what is offsite authority actually? Taking it back about 20 years, authority has evolved a lot. So in the early days of SEO, the Black Hat days, it was all about volume. So it was all about number of links into your site, and it didn't matter what the quality of those links were like. And people would just buy links from link farms and directories, and Google would see this as a great sign that you had all these links coming in. You must be an authority, boost you into the top ranking positions. And then in 2012, there was the infamous Penguin algorithm update, which was one of the first manual penalties where loads of very high profile websites drops out of the search results overnight. And that was when website owners became aware that, Google was onto them, realized that they were buying all these low quality backlinks, and actually they needed to start focusing on quality and relevance rather than quantity. The next stage was about contextual authority. So that was about 10 years ago until now. And that was where there became a greater focus on editorial integrity and topical relevance and source trustworthiness. So this was also the point at which if you were a healthcare website and you got a link from a very high authority airline website, that no longer counted for as much as if you got a link from a lower authority, but more relevant clinical or scientific journal, something like that coming in. And now the era that we're in now is authority for AI inclusion. So this is looking at things like entity consistency. So how is your brand and your product referred to, and the therapy area, how are those linked together? Citation networks. So I mentioned LLMs prefer pulling answers from certain websites over others, and signal densities. Did your brand mentions peak over a certain period in certain areas online? And what does that do to build together this idea of who you are and what you do? An important distinction is that AI doesn't read pages like Google, it reads patterns. So what this means is when a healthcare professional asks a large language model like ChatGPT about treatment options for a disease, for example, the response is assembled from patterns across the entire web, not just from a nicely optimized web page. So that might come from industry news, expert commentary on places like LinkedIn, educational video on places like YouTube, trade media, peer-reviewed journals, institutional partnerships. The web is wide. And what AI systems do is they evaluate patterns of credibility across multiple sources, not isolated websites. The way in which it actually works at a very top level is if you ask an LLM, what are recent treatment options for atrial fibrillation for people who can't take blood thinners, as an example, It will go, let's say this is ChatGPT. It'll go and first query its knowledge base. And it'll go, do I have the answer here? But then you've asked for recent treatment options. So then it's going to go and look for more recent ones because maybe some other options have come out since it built that knowledge base. So it creates this query fan out, which is lots and lots of different variations of that original question. Maybe it looks for clinical data in Europe versus US or demographic breakdowns. And then it runs all these queries through various search engines, looks at the top 10 to 20 results and sees which brands or which products or therapies are mentioned the most across all of these different results. And then it takes those top mentioned options and summarizes them into a final answer. So what this means, you can see the clear difference really, because like in that screenshot there, the gold standard before would have been just being that top blue link. But what wins in GEO is not ranking first for a keyword anymore. It's being mentioned across multiple results for that keyword. So this is where you have to think about your presence outside of your own website, which is more of your control, and whether and how you're being mentioned across other people's websites and platforms. I've mentioned entities. So just to explain what we mean here, essentially every brand, product, therapy, condition is recognized as a distinct thing, and that thing is an entity. So in this fictional example, the company is Viridia Medical, the product is called Corovax, and it addresses heart failure. The three entities here are your company, your products, and your therapy area. And we can use structured data, things like schema on the back end of a website to clearly mark up each of those entities and say, this is what the company is, this is what it makes, and this is what that product addresses. And interlinking those entities over time builds up this understanding of who you are and what you do. So your authority grows when these things are repeatedly connected across trusted sources. So using something like structured data on your own website is the first starting point, but then having other external publications talking about your products and your therapy areas in the same consistent way can help reinforce those relationships. And finally, what this means for brand and PR, rather than thinking about any one activity in isolation, you need to think about the fact that your work now trains the machines. So we're not looking at completely reinventing your workflow or starting things from scratch, but you're already doing a lot of good work. Like every company out there is putting out thought leadership content and press releases and editorial partnerships. But what you need to think about is how these different signals build together to build up an understanding of how LLMs perceive your brand. So every press mention becomes a signal, every journal citation reinforces expertise, every expert quote builds association, and every inconsistent product name weakens modeling. So conversely, you need to think about inconsistency as well as the positive things that you're building here when it comes to training the machines. So you might be thinking, okay, I want to build my offsite strategy. I need to make sure that my brand and my products are mentioned in a consistent way across various external media options, but where do I focus my efforts? And there have been quite a few studies that have come out. The most recent or most widely known one is the Semrush study from January this year. And this looks at what are the top cited domains on LLMs across the board. They looked at something like 230 million prompts. It was a huge data set across many different industries. And what came out is that Reddit is the top cited website across all LLMs, followed by LinkedIn, close behind, and Wikipedia, YouTube. Then you've got a few social channels. Interestingly, NIH.gov came up as 9th, even though this was across all industries. So it just showed the power of NIH. But if you were looking at this graph on the left, you would probably think, okay, I clearly need a solid Reddit strategy. But from speaking to many of our healthcare clients, it's very difficult. You get asked the question, well, how do I authentically and compliantly engage in conversations on Reddit as a healthcare brand representing my company? And you're very limited in what you can do realistically. But what we were seeing is we were running a lot of these LLM visibility benchmarks for our healthcare clients. And when we looked at the citation data across those different reports, we saw that the picture was very different. So we've started running this market research analysis, which is ongoing at the moment. So some of the insights that I'm going to pull out, it's an ongoing process, but these are some of the things that we've noticed so far across a couple of the therapy areas. And essentially, it's that the top cited domains on LLMs for healthcare look very different from the average. So if you look at the graph on the right, NIH absolutely dominates. Like it appears in 85% of prompt answers. YouTube is huge, 60% of answers. Other academic journals, Science Directs, and others, they feature heavily. Charitable associations feature heavily for patient queries and national health bodies. So here, the graph on the right shows you really where you should be focusing your efforts and worrying less about Reddit. One thing worth pointing out just in terms of the numbers, in case you do notice the discrepancy, is the chart on the left. What Semrush measured was the share of citations. So if Reddit was one link in an answer and there were 10, then it got a 10% citation share. Whereas the graph on the right just measures whether or not you were present in that answer. So what it shows is that nih.gov was present as a link, even if there were 10, in 85% of the prompts. And the finding that surprises people here is YouTube. It's not just a patient channel. We're busy running 6,000 prompts across both HCPs and patients and across 2 different locations and 4 different journey stages. And what we've seen is YouTube citations for HCP prompts actually grow from awareness into the treatment decision stages. So this suggests that video is surfaced when clinicians are evaluating options and not just researching symptoms. YouTube was also ahead of major consumer sites, so consistently outranks Healthline, WebMD, and even Mayo Clinic. And it's cited in the top 5 websites across every journey stage for HCPs as well as patients. So the main takeaway here is if your YouTube content isn't optimized for LLM retrieval, it's something really worth looking into now because it's a very quick win. A lot of you will already have video content out there on YouTube, but there are ways that you can optimize it to better have your content extracted and pulled into LLM responses. And the other thing that we've seen is that offsite activity needs to be mapped to journey stage and not just audience. You need different partners, different channels, different content in each stage. So if you are a brand or a website that's mainly targeting people at the diagnosis and treatment stage, then the channels and the websites that you are going to invest your time and your resource into is going to be different than if you are a informational website mainly targeting users searching at the kind of awareness and symptom stage. So you need a tailored approach depending on where you're at in the user journey, and an LLM visibility audit will show you across prompts specific to your brand which websites are the most highly cited and where it's worth building partnerships and visibility. So what to do about it and why now? Well, the window is open currently, but it won't stay open forever. And the main thing to say here is that brands who are building geo authority now will be the ones that AI cites in 12 months. The growth in LLM search is just escalating all the time. And even on Google, 88% of the healthcare queries now trigger an AI overview. And that's huge. And that is an industry-wide stat that's been shared, but it does also mirror what we've seen in reports for our healthcare clients. So that means that obviously clicks through to your website cannot be the main metric anymore. We still need them, but we need to be measuring whether we're being included in these AI overviews, whether we're being mentioned, and whether our brand is visible at that conversational stage, even before the user clicks through. There's also been 125% year-on-year growth in ChatGPT weekly active users. So going from 400 million in February 2025 to 900 million in Feb 2026. And as we know, since then, Claude usage has absolutely exploded. Many companies at an enterprise level are using Copilot, Gemini, so it's not just about ChatGPT. And I think most importantly, the average value of an LLM referral, so when someone's having a conversation back and forth with an LLM, and then they click on the link and they come through to your website, that average visitor is worth almost 4.5 times your average organic search visitor in terms of engagements on your site, revenue, conversions. And that makes a lot of sense because they're pre-qualified. The traffic levels are lower, but once they've had this whole back and forth conversation and they still decide to click through, they're much more likely to complete the action that you want them to complete on the website. So measuring your LLM referral traffic is very important to understand which parts of your website people are landing on and which content is working best for you, because that's your most valuable content, really. So how do we go about maximizing our organic visibility across the board? SEO, GEO is all working towards the same end goal. And there are 3 key areas. One is optimization builds discoverability. You need a strong technical foundation. You need optimized content, internal linking schema. It needs to be research and data-driven and audience-led to truly understand what your audience is asking and the content that you need to create to best serve their needs. But once you've done, that's when we move into offsite authority. And this is how you build credibility. So brand and product mentions across reputable websites and different forums and platforms. Links from authoritative sites, still very important for SEO. Google's been saying that links are not important for years, but many studies have shown that they still are. So if you can get them, it's still very beneficial for your website rankings. And then recommendations on community platforms. And then finally, consistency builds recognition. So this really does sound simple, but it is amazing how often we see it in reality not happening, which is you need consistent product naming across all your owned web assets, press releases, and third-party coverage. It's sometimes what we see is that our clients refer to something in a certain way internally, slightly different in the press release, then it gets syndicated or picked up by a third-party editorial piece, which talks about it slightly differently. And all of that just breaks the modeling for LLMs. So consistency is key. So when it comes to planning a offsite campaign, there are several moments that really matter along the way. The first one is your campaign ideation. So essentially, what are we building? And the question we want to answer at this point is, which entity relationships does this campaign need to strengthen? What do we want Google and users and LLMs to associate our brand with when this campaign is finished running? The next thing is channel selection. Where does it live? So which channels will put your company in front of the sources that AI already trusts? And we've seen from the data, like obviously the website that we mentioned already, but LinkedIn, huge for thought leadership, and then third-party editorial, scientific journals. Those are the main ones for healthcare. Publisher briefing. So what language are we using? Are we giving journalists and partners the exact product name, therapy area, and clinical context that we want them to use? So this is how we want you to refer to the products in the opening sentence of your piece of coverage. And then finally, amplification. Does it come back to us? Ideally, no piece of coverage should just exist in isolation. So when it goes live, does it feed back into our own channels? Are we reposting it on LinkedIn from key opinion leaders? Are we maybe creating a video summary of what's gone out and embedding it on our webpage? The most effective authority strategies are embedded into workflows, not layered on at the end. So this is really the process from ideation through to amplification to get the maximum reach for your campaigns. What does good look like? Here's a scenario. If you are a medtech company and you release new clinical data demonstrating improved recovery times for a next generation cardiac device, how do you go about launching an offsite campaign for this cardiac device that is going to get you maximum visibility both on search engines as well as LLMs? Firstly, journal collaboration. So you might co-author a peer-reviewed cardiology study, and you're going to focus on, as a starting point, NIH and Science Direct, because we know from the LLM benchmark that those are the two most important journals to get your article published on. And the authority signals that this generates are institutional validation and high trust domain association. These are your very authoritative sites. And so it counts for a huge amount. And it's the first place that LLMs will go for medical queries. The next one might be an expert quote placement. So you could get a leading interventional cardiologist who provides commentary in an industry publication discussing how this data shifts treatment decision-making. And what this does, it creates this brand expert association and reinforces some of those clinical entities. So your device, your indication, and outcome. Then you might create a YouTube explainer video. So an expert-led educational video, which explains the mechanism of action, who benefits most, and how it compares to previous approaches. And then, of course, once you've got this video, you need to make sure you've optimized it with consistent naming, links to educational landing pages, keyword-rich chapters, and the transcripts, because all of this will help with LLM extraction and allow them to pull the right information into answers when people are searching. And the authority signals generated here are search and AI visibility, great for AI visibility, but also, as we know, YouTube content is surfaced on Google all the time. And transcript-driven entity reinforcements. Transcripts are automatically generated these days. You just have to sense check them, and it creates a really rich source of additional keywords and topics and entities. And then finally, perhaps a piece of LinkedIn thought leadership. So you could have an executive and clinical leaders publishing coordinated posts, but not identical, discussing the broader impacts on patient outcomes, innovation within the therapy area, and industry implications. As a side note, long-form articles are favored by LLM. It's about 80% of the LinkedIn content that comes into an LLM answers from these longer-form articles 500 to 2,000 words. Shorter, quick update posts tend to feature less. So if you are going to be using LinkedIn, think about the length and depth of the content. And the authority signals generated here are professional ecosystem reinforcement, and again, just repeated therapy terminology across authoritative profiles. And what we're looking at here is just really authority compounds through coordinated repetition across trusted ecosystems. So the benefit is 4 times if you can use this one piece of content, but across 4 different areas. So how do we know if it's working? If we start following this approach, what does success look like? Well, in the first 3 months, you'll probably see your visibility increasing. You would have created an established baseline for your SEO and LLM metric in terms of referring domains and site authority and citation, shares, so how often your website is linked from the LLM answer, and brand mentions, how often your brand is actually included in the answer. You'll start to see your content appearing in Google AI overviews for target queries. Your LLM citation frequency for branded queries will start growing because obviously it's easier to make inroads into branded queries than non-branded in the beginning. And you'll see your brand mentions increasing across trusted editorial sources. And then between about 3 and 12 months, you should see your authority compounding. So your authority score will start growing on your websites. And that's just a measure of how reputable and trustworthy your website is. You'll see an increase in high quality referring domains coming into your site. Your company will start appearing in unbranded therapy queries in AI responses. And your competitive share of voice will start growing in both search and LLM. So the market share and the visibility that you're taking from key competitors will increase. And then long term, you're looking at category leadership. So with the way we measure this is your company is cited consistently in AI responses for priority therapy areas. LLM referral traffic is generating measurable conversions. And the good news is GA4 has a way to just automatically measure this now. So it's easy to get a view on that. And branded search volume starts growing in therapy specific terms as people start associating your brand with the therapy area. So before your next campaign goes out, there's just a few quick things that you would be able to ask yourself to see whether you are maximizing your potential to drive LLM and search visibility with your offsite campaign. So firstly, does this earn third-party endorsement, a link, a mention, or a citation? Are we reinforcing entity relationships? Are we taking the opportunity to reinforce those relationships between your product, your therapy, and the indication? Is an expert cited externally? Are we using consistent product naming across all outputs? And have we considered where else this could live? So is there a way that we can amplify it? That is a lot of information covered in a short space of time. So just to recap, some of the things that you should now know, AI doesn't rank pages, it recognizes patterns. So that means that every piece of coverage that you create is either building or fragmenting that pattern. Your existing activity is already building authority. The opportunity is to make what you do work harder. And finally, zero click does not mean zero impact. A mention, a citation, a press release, all of this trains the machines. So your measurement model needs to adapt to reflect this. We're no longer just looking at clicks. We're looking at brand mentions and LLM responses. We're looking at LLM referral traffic. We're looking at citations. We're looking at inclusion in AI overviews. And there are a few quick things you could do literally this week. So one is you could just manually run your top 3 therapy queries through ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Google AI mode to see who is cited and see if your own brand is mentioned in the response. You could apply the authority checklist to your next campaign or press release before it goes out. And as I mentioned, you could view LLM referral traffic in GA4 to understand your most cited pages, because then you could take learnings from those pages and apply them to the rest of your site content. And finally, if you're looking to take it a step further and really embed this into your geo approach company-wide, there are a few longer term things you could do. So one is a geo visibility audit, which is where you can run hundreds or thousands of relevant prompts through an LLM tracking tool, and you can map where your brand stands today. So you can see how often your brand is mentioned in the responses and how often websites that you own are linked to from the answer. You could then enhance that with a competitive benchmark report, so you can see how your visibility compares with key competitors and identify where the biggest gaps and opportunities lie. And then finally, we're always here if you would like to start a conversation about a full offsite or geo strategy bespoke to your brand. But hopefully that has given you enough of a thought starter in terms of how to approach your offsite strategy. And I am going to stop sharing now and see if there are any questions. Do the top cited domains for healthcare mean the US dominates impacts on GEO? It's an interesting one. We have run LLM benchmark reports across the US and the UK mainly, and some parts of Europe. It depends on your website structure. So what we've seen quite a lot is that for pharmaceutical brands, there's a lot more that companies are able to do in the US. So you can have a branded website that talks a lot about what your brand does. And so if people are asking about that brand in the UK and there isn't a branded website here and all there is like a summary of that brand on the NHS, then often we will actually end up seeing the US content being cited within the UK. So part of it is around regulation and what is and isn't allowed on a website level. But we've also seen from running these LLM benchmark reports for some of our clients that not having the right internationalization set up has meant that the wrong country's content ends up appearing. So it might be the case that you have the same content in both the UK and the US, but because the internationalization hasn't been set up, hreflang, forgive me if it sounds very technical, but basically the way that you say this is what needs to be in the UK, this is what it needs to be in the US, if that hasn't been set up correctly, the US will often end up dominating. So getting your technical foundation, your SEO basics sorted can massively benefit having the right content being shown in the right location. The question here, if we're already cited in some responses, how do we find out and build on that? So the way that you could do that is you can run your own LLM benchmark report. So you could, as I mentioned, you could run hundreds or thousands of different prompts through one of these tracking tools. We use AccuRanker, but there's another one called Profound. We've used Omnia. There's quite a lot of them out there at the moment. And you can see where you're being cited. We've seen with quite a few of our clients that they often tend to dominate in certain therapy areas and be almost absent in others. So the first thing you can find out is, are you present in specific therapy areas? Are you more visible for patient or HCP prompt? And then you can find out which parts of your website are most frequently being linked to. You can also see from your LLM referral traffic, which landing pages are capturing the most referral traffic from LLMs. And then those two pieces of information together can ladder up to build a strategy. So you can look at, okay, why do we think that this particular page is performing better than other pages on the site? Why do we think that we're performing better in certain therapy areas? Is it that we're getting more coverage about our heart failure indication than our type 2 diabetes indication? And then that can help feed into your strategy. You mentioned YouTube is cited at very high rates. Does that apply even to content that isn't publicly promoted or widely viewed? This comes up a lot with healthcare clients. Is most beneficial if your YouTube content is public. You can have it unlisted, which means that if you've got the link, you can go through to the YouTube video and you'll still be able to watch it. But the problem is that if people are searching on YouTube, your unlisted video won't appear. So YouTube SEO, you can do all the things right. You can create a great title, nice long description. But if it's not being surfaced in YouTube search, it's very difficult for the LLMs to find it too. So it's not to say it's impossible. Like your unlisted video could maybe get added to a playlist or it could get embedded on a website. And that way the LLMs might find it, but you have a much better chance of them digesting the content in your videos if they are public. And what we've seen with a lot of our clients is that sometimes it's a regulatory thing, in which case, obviously, you need to keep it unlisted. But sometimes it's just a process thing. So it's always worth looking at why they're unlisted in the first place or why they're private. And if it's not a regulatory reason, is it worth maybe adding them to your public YouTube page? If it's totally private, there's no way that the LLMs can access them, unfortunately. Do you have any tool or website where we can see the audit report of a site from LLM perspective? There are multiple tools out there where you could actually just put your website in and it'll tell you a number of prompts that you are apparently appearing for and give you some of your AI visibility and room for improvement. Even Semrush, if you just go and input a domain now, it'll give you like an AI visibility score. But what we've found is more useful is if you come up with prompts that you care about, like what are the measures of success for your business? What are your main audience needs? And you run those prompts through an LLM tracking tool, you can see the visibility of your brand for the things that you really care about. Yeah, as I mentioned, we use AccuRanker, AccuLLM, which works pretty well. We've also used a platform called Omnia, which was good. We are investigating Semrush at the moment, but it has quite a lot of limitations unless you have the enterprise level for prompt tracking. But we are in an era now where they're launching all the time, new platforms. And obviously we need to be investigating them all the time and weighing them up against each other, because none of them are 100% perfect so far from what I've tried, but they all do the job fairly well. So I'm always happy to follow up with a list there. What are the limitations of this communication channel, considering assets that are still in development? What could or should be done already pre-launch? I think if I understand this question correctly, so if you've got like a website that hasn't launched yet and you've got things that aren't publicly accessible, I think the main thing is around planning your actual launch strategy, even if the assets are still in development. So if you're going to build editorial partnerships and you want to get coverage from certain third-party places, who are the best ones to approach? So you can do like an offsite audit. So you could look at, even if you are a new brand launching, you could look at the space that you're entering into. Who are the main competitors? What kind of coverage are they getting? What are their domain authorities? How prevalent are they in LLM answers? So through a combination of SEO and LLM research, and then understand, okay, who are the publications that are best placed to reach out to from an SEO perspective, because they're high authority, they already cover your competitors in this space. And then from an LLM perspective, which are the platforms that are most frequently cited? And then build your targeted outreach plan, even if you don't have the assets yet, so that once they're live, you already have the plan in place, the way that you're going to brief third-party media as well in terms of referring to your brand, your product, and the therapy area, that all of that is ready, even if your assets aren't ready. And then at the point at which you launch, you're ready to go out with that communication plan. And then there's a question about image search with AI. I have a picture of a nasty rash. I upload the photo to ChatGPT. How can I get my brand mentioned? Similar picture of rashes on my webpage. Very interesting question. I do not know the answer to that, John Campbell, but it's something I'll take away and research. I think probably with these kind of symptom level queries, from the research that we've done, it is very difficult to get your brand mentioned in the answer. Most of the time, the answer will feature some therapy or some compound or some type of medication. But generally, like from the research that we did, only 8% of citations went to branded websites across these non-branded searches. So it is very difficult, and they tend to go mainly to these institutional and health aggregator sites. But yeah, something definitely worth considering, the rise in image search. Perfect. And I think that is everything, unless anyone has got any other questions. Okay, awesome. And we are within time. Thank you, everyone. I hope you found it useful. We will be following up with the video recording and just some additional content following this, so keep an eye on your inbox. And then for the market research piece, that is ongoing. The results that I shared were across the first couple of therapy areas, but we're doing 5 in total, 6,000 prompts, and we'll have all the data ready in August, and you'll be able to dig down into the therapy area that's most relevant to your brand. So yeah, we'll be sending that out in August, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and I hope everyone survives the heat.